After returning from the hospital, I found a new fridge in my kitchen, and my son looked at me and said, "That one's mine." When Eleanor Hayes stepped out of the cab in front of her own house, her body still felt like it belonged to the hospital. Her legs trembled with every step, the surgical incision burned beneath her blouse, and the faint smell of antiseptic still clung to her skin. 11 long days she had spent in that sterile room, fighting an infection that could have ended her life, listening to machines beep and footsteps echo in distant hallways. Not once had her phone lit up with a call from her son. Not a message. Not a visitor. Gregory, her only child, had not appeared. His wife, Michelle, had not even sent a polite, "How are you?" text. When the doctor finally signed her discharge papers, she had watched other patients leave with relatives and friends, with flowers and smiles. She had asked a nurse, embarrassed, to call a taxi for her because no one was waiting. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. She walked into the house with a foolish, stubborn piece of hope still beating in her chest. Maybe there would be a note. Maybe Gregory had left a pot of soup on the stove, or Michelle had at least tidied up, or someone had written, "Welcome home, Mom." She pushed the door open slowly, one hand bracing herself on the frame. Silence greeted her, heavy and indifferent. Then she saw it. In the kitchen, next to her old battered refrigerator, stood a second one, tall and gleaming, all chrome and blue light. It looked like it belonged in some glossy magazine ad, not in her modest kitchen. She stared at it, confused, clutching the small hospital bag in her hand. Gregory ambled out of the living room with a beer can dangling from his fingers, as if it were any normal afternoon. Michelle followed, holding adhesive labels and a black permanent marker. Neither of them rushed toward her. Neither asked about her surgery, her pain, or whether she had eaten. "What is this?" Eleanor asked, her voice still raspy from hospital air as she gestured weakly at the new appliance. Gregory took a slow sip of beer before replying, as if bored by the question. "Our fridge, Mom. For our stuff." He said it casually, like weather talk. Eleanor repeated the words, unable to process them. "Your fridge." Michelle had already crouched in front of the shining door, pressing labels onto the clear shelves inside. On every rack, drawer and compartment, she wrote her chosen name in bold, thick letters. Shelley. Over and over again. Shelley on the meat drawer, Shelley on the vegetable bin, Shelley on the top shelf. "Exactly," Michelle said without even glancing at Eleanor. "For our groceries. The ones we buy with our own money. We don't want them mixed with yours." The incision on Eleanor's abdomen throbbed. Her chest tightened. "But this is my house," she whispered, feeling the words crumble as they left her mouth. Gregory chuckled dryly. "Sure, Mom. Your house, technically. But we live here too, remember? And with what you get from Social Security, you can't afford what we like. This way everybody knows what's what." Michelle stood up and admired the rows of labels as if she had finished a craft project. Each strip of paper reflected light like a little slap. "Don't take it personally, Eleanor," she added, using Eleanor's name like she was talking to a stranger. "It's just practical. You buy your stuff, we buy ours. No confusion, no drama." Eleanor's gaze drifted to her old fridge. Inside, there were a few basic items. Some milk, eggs, cheap cheese, a half loaf of bread. She imagined the new fridge full of things she dared not buy. Expensive cuts of meat, imported cheeses, wines in dark bottles. Two worlds, side by side, in the same kitchen. Two realities divided not by walls but by money and contempt. "I've never kept you from taking anything from my fridge," she managed to say. Gregory crushed his empty can and tossed it into the trash without looking. "We know, Mom, but this is more organized. More fair." That word echoed in her mind like a cruel joke. Fair. Michelle swung open the door of the new refrigerator and proudly displayed shelves lined with luxuries. Marbled steaks, salmon, shrimp, soft cheeses in waxed wrappers, bottles of wine worth more than Eleanor's weekly groceries. "We have standards," Michelle added lightly. We don't like eating the same things you do. No offense. The casual disdain in her tone hurt more than the stitches. Gregory clapped his hand on his mother's shoulder with patronizing tenderness. Relax, Mom. Don't make a big deal out of it. It's not personal. It's just, you're not young anymore. Your pension barely covers the basics. We need more. We deserve more. The word deserve cut deeper than any scalpel. Eleanor wanted to tell him about 35 years at the factory, about the nights she'd come home unable to feel her hands, about the jewelry she'd sold to pay for his private college. She wanted to remind them of every sacrifice she had ever made. But her body was exhausted, her heart cracked, and the hospital smell still lingered in her nose. Instead, she murmured that she was going to rest and dragged her small bag toward the narrow room in the back. The room had once been her sewing space, a corner where she had dreamed up dresses and curtains. Now it was a cramped cell with a single bed and an old wardrobe. Gregory and Michelle had moved in for a few months during the pandemic and never left. Little by little, they had taken over the master bedroom, the living room, the best furniture, until her home felt like a boarding house where the owner had become an inconvenience. She lay down carefully, feeling every stitch pull. From the front of the house came the sound of their laughter, the television blaring, the clink of wine glasses, and the faint hum of the shiny new refrigerator. They were celebrating something, and she suspected the victory they toasted was her silence. Tears flowed quietly into her pillow. She was 68 years old, with swollen joints and a heart full of memories, reduced to a side room in the house her husband had left to protect her. Each one of their phrases, your meager pension, your food, we deserve more, hammered away at what remained of the bond between them. For years she had excused, forgave, and explained away their cruelty. But that evening, lying in that cramped, dark room, something inside her shifted. The Eleanor who always yielded had been left behind somewhere between the four poles and the disinfectant. The woman who had come home from the hospital was someone new. Someone who had finally decided things would not stay this way. Sleep evaded her for hours. Every time Eleanor closed her eyes, she saw Michelle's name plastered across those clear shelves like a brand on an animal. Shelley. 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 It was more than a label. It was a declaration that this space was hers, that Eleanor's presence was secondary. The house echoed with Gregory and Michelle's laughter long after midnight. They watched their shows, poured themselves generous glasses of wine from their fridge, and ignored the closed door at the end of the hallway. When the sounds finally faded and the house grew still, an exhausted, heavy sleep finally crept over Eleanor. She awoke before dawn, at 5 in the morning, to a silent house. Her body ached, but the pain no longer frightened her. She had discovered there were pains far worse than the stitches on her abdomen. She moved slowly to the kitchen. In the dim light, the two refrigerators stood side by side, the new one humming softly. Those stupid labels seemed to glow in the half-dark. Eleanor opened her old fridge first. The meagerness of its contents was almost comical. A small carton of milk, 3 eggs, some cheap cheese, yesterday's bread. This was what she ate while her pension disappeared into bills and the endless demands her son called emergencies. She closed the door and then, almost against her will, opened the new fridge. It was overflowing with abundance. Thick steaks, salmon, shrimp, soft cheeses with foreign names, bottles of expensive wine, trays of cut fruit, neatly arranged pastries. Her stomach turned as rage and humiliation mixed in her chest. They lived like royalty in the house her husband had left her while she counted coins to buy bread. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the table. Her thoughts circled helplessly around the same questions. She could tell them to leave. The deed to the house was in her name. But months earlier Gregory had made her sign some paperwork he claimed was about updating the will and keeping everything in order. She had signed without reading, a habit born of trust and exhaustion. Now, the memory of his insistence filled her with dread. She could try to leave instead, find herself a small apartment and vanish from their lives. But on her limited income, rent would devour everything and leave her with nothing. Confronting them had never worked. Every attempt had ended in tears and accusations, with Gregory and Michelle twisting the conversation until she felt guilty for even questioning them. Around 9, she heard them getting ready upstairs, arguing over shampoo and who would make breakfast. No one asked if she needed help. No one knocked to see how she was feeling after 11 days in a hospital bed. The front door slammed, the car engine started, and the house fell silent again. After waiting several minutes to make sure they were truly gone, Eleanor left a small room. The living room and kitchen looked like the aftermath of a careless party. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, clothing thrown over the arm of the couch, food wrappers scattered across surfaces. On the counter, smoked salmon and cream cheese rested uncovered, attracting flies. She cleaned mechanically. She wasn't doing it out of affection anymore. It felt like muscle memory, the reflex of someone who had spent a lifetime erasing other people's messes. As she stood at the sink, she glanced out the window and saw her neighbor, Beverly Jenkins, watering the flowers in her front yard. Beverly was in her early 70s, also a widow. Yet she always seemed composed, hair neatly done, clothes carefully chosen, a small smile on her face. Eleanor had known her for years, but their friendship had never gone beyond exchanged greetings and small talk about the weather. Today, seeing Beverly standing upright and at peace while Eleanor's own insides felt shattered, stirred a hot, bitter envy in her chest. Beverly looked up. Their eyes met. Beverly raised her hand. Eleanor lifted her own, forcing a faint smile. Instead of going back to her plants, Beverly set down the watering can and walked toward Eleanor's front door. A moment later, a soft knock sounded. Eleanor hesitated. She didn't want anyone to see her like this, fragile and ashamed. But something stronger than her pride pushed her to open the door. Beverly stood there, holding her straw hat with both hands, her expression gentle. "Morning, Eleanor," she said. "I saw you come back from the hospital yesterday. How are you feeling?" It was such a simple question, one that doctors and nurses had asked 100 times, but from Beverly it landed differently. It sounded sincere. "I'm getting better," Eleanor lied automatically. Beverly studied her face with a seriousness that made Eleanor feel both exposed and seen. "May I come in for a moment?" she asked. Eleanor stepped aside and gestured toward the kitchen. As soon as Beverly entered, she noticed the 2 refrigerators. Her eyes widened, then narrowed as she took in the labels. "That's new," she said carefully. Eleanor explained in a low voice what Gregory and Michelle had told her about the second fridge. Shame prickled her skin as she spoke, as if she were confessing some failure. Beverly listened and then looked directly at her. "Eleanor, I hope you won't be offended by what I'm about to say," she began slowly, "but I have to tell you something I've been keeping to myself for months." Eleanor's heart thudded. "What is it?" Beverly set her hat down and placed both hands flat on the table. "I hear things," she said quietly. "The walls between our houses are not as thick as people think. I hear how they talk to you, how they order you around, how they treat you." Eleanor lowered her gaze. Humiliation burned in her throat. Beverly continued, her voice firm but kind. "Last night, when you came back from the hospital, I heard everything. I heard them talking about your pension, about your groceries, about that fridge. I heard the way they spoke to you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears before Beverly had even finished. "And after you went to bed," Beverly added, "I kept hearing them. They opened that new fridge, poured wine, and started celebrating. Then Michelle said something that chilled me." Beverly squeezed Eleanor's hand. She said, "It won't be long now. The old woman can't hold out forever. When she dies, this house will be all ours. It's worth at least 200,000. We'll finally live the way we deserve." The room seemed to tilt. Eleanor clutched the edge of the table. Beverly's voice stayed steady. "Gregory laughed," she said, and answered something like, "I hope she hurries up. I'm tired of pretending to care." It felt as if someone had ripped Eleanor's chest open. Those words didn't just hurt. They shattered the last illusions she had clung to. Deep down, some part of her had believed there was still love under all the selfishness. Beverly watched her, eyes full of compassion. There's more, she said. I've noticed strange things these last weeks. Your son leaves the bank with a stack of papers, looking very tense. Delivery trucks dropping off expensive-looking boxes when you aren't around, boxes she drags inside quickly. Something isn't right, Eleanor. I can feel it. Eleanor admitted in a trembling voice that she suspected there were things happening with her money, but she didn't know how to figure them out. She confessed she had signed documents she barely understood. Beverly nodded slowly. Then you need help, she said. Legal help. A friend of mine, Arthur Dawson, is a retired lawyer. He takes on cases of elder abuse and financial exploitation because of what happened to his own mother. Let me call him. He'll come this afternoon if you're willing. The words elder abuse sounded harsh, but they fit everything better than any excuse Eleanor had tried to make. Abuse wasn't just a punch or a scream. It was also manipulation, deceit, and theft of trust. Would you talk to him? Beverly asked. Eleanor thought of Gregory as a child, of the nights she had stayed up when he had a fever. Then she thought of him laughing over wine, impatient for her to die. She thought of the second fridge, of the labels, of the years of demands. Yes, she whispered finally, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Yes, I will. Beverly smiled gently and took out her phone. She spoke to Arthur in a low tone, explaining the situation, her words strangely comforting. She's being exploited. There are suspicious bank movements. We need to protect her. When she hung up, she said, He'll be here at 3. He wants you to gather all your documents. Bank statements, anything you've signed, any account information you have. After Beverly left, Eleanor walked through the house with new eyes. The twin refrigerators in the kitchen no longer looked like a simple insult. They were evidence. Proof that something was very wrong. The hours crawled toward 3 in the afternoon. To distract herself from the fear, she began to search for her records. In the small room, she dragged out the box where she had stored important papers for years. Pension notices, bank statements, insurance policies. Her hands shook as she sorted through the pile, but beneath the fear, something else had taken root. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was doing something to protect herself. When the clock neared 3, Eleanor's dining table was covered in neat stacks of papers. Bank statements from the last months. Utility bills. Copies of her pension slips. Letters she hadn't fully understood but had filed anyway. At 3 exactly, Beverly knocked on the door again. She wasn't alone. With her stood a tall man in his 60s, with silver hair, calm eyes, and a worn leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Arthur Dawson and shook Eleanor's hand with a grip that was firm yet gentle. Beverly told me some of what's happening, he said, taking a seat at the table. I'm here to help you, and I won't charge you a cent. This is important to me personally. He explained briefly that his own mother had been financially exploited by a relative. They hadn't found out until it was too late to help her, and she had died feeling betrayed and impoverished. I promised myself I would do anything I could to stop that from happening to others, he said quietly. That confession melted some of Eleanor's embarrassment. She wasn't just a foolish old woman who had let herself be used. She was part of a pattern that many people suffered. Arthur pulled the stack of bank statements toward him. Let's begin with your accounts, he said. Tell me which ones you recognize and which you don't. For the next 2 hours, they went through her finances line by line. Eleanor pointed to her regular pension deposits, to the utility payments, the pharmacy charges, the grocery store nearby. But there were entries she did not recognize, repeated withdrawals of large amounts of cash at ATMs across town, transfers to unfamiliar account numbers, recurring charges for premium services she never used. Arthur noted each suspicious item. This is not small, he said. Over time, these little amounts add up to a lot of money. Beverly watched silently, her presence a steadying force. Eleanor began to understand just how wide the hole was beneath her feet. Then Arthur asked if she had ever signed documents at the bank or at home without knowing exactly what they were. Eleanor admitted that Gregory often put forms in front of her, saying they were for renewal of house records, insurance, or routine bank procedures. She had signed quickly to avoid discussions. Arthur frowned. That could include loan applications, credit cards, even liens against the house, he said. We need to check. Encouraged by him, Eleanor went into what used to be her bedroom, now Gregory and Michelle's, and began to search their belongings for clues. The master bedroom smelled strongly of Michelle's perfume. The bed was unmade, clothes lay thrown over chairs, and stacked along one wall were the boxes Beverly had mentioned. Boxes from luxury brands, carefully sealed. She opened one and found designer shoes. Another contained handbags with metal logos. In the closet hung dresses with price tags still attached and suits that looked expensive. On Gregory's bedside table, Eleanor found a watch box with several pieces of jewelry. There were receipts, crumpled but legible, for dinners in upscale restaurants, bar tabs, and even a recent visit to a casino where Gregory had lost hundreds of dollars in a single night, all while claiming they had nothing to help with household bills. In a drawer on Michelle's side, she found credit card statements, 3 different cards with staggering balances. One reflected a debt of $20,000, another 8, the last 5. But the document that made her knees weak was a statement for a card with her own name at the top. $10,000 of credit, almost all used. The list of purchases read like a catalogue of someone else's life. Furniture, electronics, clothes, dinners, trips. She had never seen this card. She had never requested it. Eleanor brought the statements back to Arthur, her hands trembling. He studied them and nodded grimly. This is identity theft and fraud, he said. Opening accounts in your name without your knowledge is a serious crime. They returned to her own small room and dug out more documents. Among them, they found a loan application form connected to the house, for $50,000. The house was being used as collateral, and the signature at the bottom was supposed to be hers. Arthur compared it to older documents. This signature has been traced, he said. It's not yours, not naturally. Someone copied it. The loan was in the pending approval stage. Eleanor realized they hadn't planned to wait for her to die to get the house. They intended to use it immediately. As they laid everything out on the table, the fraudulent card statements, the loan applications, the suspicious bank transactions, Arthur summarized what they were dealing with. Your son and daughter-in-law have committed multiple acts of financial elder abuse, he said. We're talking about unauthorized financial control, theft, forgery, identity fraud, and attempted exploitation of your property. All of that is prosecutable. Eleanor asked in a small voice whether he could go to prison. Arthur didn't rush the answer. If you decide to file criminal charges, he said, it is possible. But first we should consider your options. He described 3 paths. The first was a family confrontation without legal action, a conversation where she would demand the abuse stop and the money be returned in some informal arrangement. In my experience, this almost never works long-term, he said. People who exploit often deny and manipulate. Eleanor knew that pattern too well. The second path was a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds, claim damages, and obtain restraining orders if necessary. It would be slower, but structured. The third option was the most severe, formal criminal charges, letting the justice system pursue Gregory and Michelle as offenders. The first thing we must do before any confrontation, Arthur continued, is secure your finances. Tomorrow morning, we go to the bank. We freeze that attempted loan. We cut off any access they have to your accounts. We place protections around your property. Once that's done, then we talk to them. Eleanor felt overwhelmed, but there was a clarity that hadn't existed before. For the first time, someone was calling what had been happening by its real name. Abuse. Exploitation. Crime. Beverly offered to keep the original documents at her house, in case Gregory and Michelle searched Eleanor's things. Eleanor handed her a bag full of papers. When they left, the house seemed strangely quiet. She glanced at the 2 refrigerators again. The lines on the labels no longer only wounded, they became part of a growing body of evidence. That night, when Gregory and Michelle came home loaded with shopping bags, she met them in the living room and told them she wanted to go to the bank with Gregory to clarify a few strange charges. He reacted with irritation and clumsy excuses, suddenly too busy, already inventing interviews and plans. Michelle treated the request as an insult. Eleanor didn't argue. She only repeated that she intended to go to the bank. Later in her room she texted Beverly, "Please ask Arthur if he can come with us. I want to go first." Beverly replied that they would pick her up at 8. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor went to sleep knowing that tomorrow would be different. The next morning, Eleanor dressed with care. She chose the sober outfit she had worn to Bernard's funeral, a dark dress and a simple cardigan. It made her feel solid, not fragile. When Gregory came down for coffee, he raised an eyebrow at her clothes. She lied that she had a post-surgery checkup. "Beverly's taking me," she added lightly, not giving him a chance to insist on coming. At 8 sharp, Beverly pulled up with Arthur in the passenger seat. The ride to the bank felt long. Arthur calmly reviewed the plan, talked to the manager, file fraud reports, cancel authorizations, change passwords, freeze suspicious loans, and set alerts for any future transactions. His methodical tone steadied her nerves. At the bank, a young employee led them to the branch manager, Marcus Johnson, a man in his 50s with a tired but kind face. In a private office, Arthur introduced himself as Eleanor's legal representative and laid out the situation plainly. Eleanor added what she knew, admitting she had trusted her son with paperwork and accounts, that she often signed things without understanding. Marcus listened carefully, his expression growing more serious as Arthur placed copies of the fraudulent documents before him. "This is very serious," Marcus said finally. "We'll need to open a formal fraud investigation on all of Ms. Hayes' accounts." For the next hour, Marcus navigated through Eleanor's account history on his computer. He pointed out patterns of withdrawals far from her neighborhood, recurring charges for services she didn't recognize, and large transfers to a particular account that was not in her name. When Eleanor asked, almost fearful, how much money had been taken without her knowledge, Marcus calculated silently. "In the last 2 years," he said, "about $42,000. The number hung in the air like a blow. Eleanor felt sick. Years of savings, dribbled away into someone else's lifestyle. Then Marcus pulled up the pending home equity loan connected to her address. It had been initiated 2 weeks earlier. The digital document appeared on the screen, with a signature at the bottom that looked like hers at first glance. But when Marcus printed it and compared it with older documents, the subtle differences were apparent. "This isn't a natural signature," he said. "It's forged." He froze the loan request immediately, noting that if it had been processed, Gregory and Michelle could have taken $50,000 guaranteed by the value of the house. The bank began the internal procedures to block the loan and open a fraud case on all unauthorized transactions. They spent more time changing passwords, updating security questions, removing any authority Gregory had over her accounts, and flagging all suspicious movements. The unauthorized credit cards were cancelled and marked as fraudulent. Marcus explained that, after the investigation, the bank could return at least part of the stolen money and would file its own complaints against those responsible. As Eleanor signed the documents that protected her instead of exposing her, she felt strangely taller inside. Fear was still there, but it no longer paralyzed her. By the time they left the bank, she held a folder full of evidence and confirmations. She had been robbed, and the institutions now recognized it. On the drive home, Arthur said that the next step was inevitable: confrontation. "When people who exploit realize the money flow is cut off," he explained, "they panic. Better to talk to them now, while we're ready, before they start destroying or hiding evidence." Eleanor listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. A part of her still wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding. But the images of the receipts, the credit cards, the pending loan erased that last bit of denial. She didn't want to return to a house where she walked around like a ghost. She wanted her home back. While Gregory and Michelle were out, Arthur and Beverly helped to document everything. Arthur took photos of the labeled fridge, the luxury items scattered through the master bedroom, the boxes of designer clothes, the large television, the gadgets and accessories that screamed money. All of this can be used to show the lifestyle they were funding, he said. It's important. Beverly made tea and coaxed Eleanor into eating something. They discussed how the conversation should go. Arthur advised firmly, no shouting contest, no emotional begging. You speak from facts, he said. I will outline the legal reality. Beverly will support you. Whatever they try to twist, we bring it back to the documents. At 6 o'clock, the sound of the car pulling up outside echoed through the house. Eleanor's heart raced. She stood in the living room, Arthur in a chair with his briefcase, Beverly nearby. Gregory and Michelle came in with shopping bags from upscale stores, laughing. When they saw the three of them, their smiles vanished. Suspicion flickered across Gregory's face. What's going on? He asked. Who is this? Michelle demanded, glaring at Arthur. Sit down, Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady. We need to talk. Michelle rolled her eyes, already irritated. We're tired, Eleanor. We've had a long day. Gregory, however, sensed something more. There was an edge to his voice now. Mom, what did you do? Arthur rose and introduced himself formally as Eleanor's legal counsel. Gregory's face went pale at the word, counsel. Eleanor met his eyes and spoke the sentence that broke whatever fragile facade remained. I know everything, Gregory. Everything you've done. The room fell silent. The shopping bags remained on the floor, their luxury logos screaming in the quiet. Eleanor sat down before her legs gave out. The battle she had been avoiding for months, perhaps years, was finally beginning. That confrontation left scars on everyone in the room, but for Eleanor, it also opened the door to a new life. Arthur laid out the evidence calmly. Unauthorized credit cards in her name, loans taken and transferred into Gregory's account, a forged application using the house as collateral, bank withdrawals far beyond anything she had consented to. Gregory tried to deflect, claiming it was all confusion, insisting she had agreed to everything and simply forgotten. Michelle alternated between outrage and crocodile tears, playing the martyr who had sacrificed everything to live in this old house, with a woman who didn't appreciate them. But the documents and Beverly's testimony about what she had overheard the night Eleanor came home from the hospital cut through every lie. Arthur gave them a stark choice. Either they admitted the fraud, signed an agreement to repay the stolen money, and left the house immediately, or Eleanor would proceed with full criminal charges for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Michelle protested that it was blackmail, that Eleanor was ruining her own family. Gregory tried to emotionally corner his mother, reminding her he was her only child. But Eleanor, with Beverly's hand quietly gripping hers, held her ground. Family doesn't steal from you and wait for you to die, she said. You made the choices. I am making mine now. Gregory and Michelle were given 2 hours to pack their belongings. Watching them drag suitcases through the house, trying to slip small objects into their luggage until Arthur stopped them, was agonizing and liberating at once. Michelle emptied the new fridge angrily, filling bags with cheeses, meats, and wines she declared were hers. Eleanor let her take every last piece of food, confident in a way she hadn't been before that what mattered now was not the groceries, but the fact that that monstrous fridge would soon be gone. When the front door finally closed behind the packed car and the engine disappeared down the street, Eleanor's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the sofa. The sobs that came were deep and raw, but they were not the cries of a woman defeated. They were the tears of someone who had finally, painfully, reclaimed herself. Beverly wrapped her arms around her, holding her while she shook. Arthur quietly collected his notes and documents. You did the right thing, he said when she could finally breathe normally. This hurts now, but you protected yourself. And you've sent a clear message. You're not a victim anymore. Over the next few days, the practical consequences set in. Arthur drafted and finalized the legal repayment agreement. Gregory, after disappearing for a short time, returned alone and chose the option that kept him out of jail. He acknowledged the fraud and committed to repaying every dollar, with interest, in monthly installments. Michelle, on the other hand, vanished from Eleanor's life entirely. The bank initiated its own actions against her for the fraudulent accounts. Eleanor focused on what she could control. She sold the new fridge and used the money to buy plants for her neglected garden. Little by little, she reclaimed her home. She moved back into her former bedroom, washed the sheets, aired out the space, and replaced the traces of Michelle's scent with the comforting smell of lavender. She and Beverly painted the walls of the living room a warm, soft color. They rearranged the furniture so it felt like her house again, not a place she was allowed to occupy as a tolerated guest. 3 months passed, then 4. The bank completed part of its investigation and returned a portion of the stolen funds, enough for Eleanor to fix the leaking roof, repair the plumbing, and finally take care of some long-postponed maintenance. Gregory's monthly payments arrived, modest but punctual, proof that he had found work. They didn't speak. There were no phone calls, no visits, only those sterile transfers. It was painful, but it also gave her space to heal. Beverly became more than a neighbor. She became the family that wasn't tied by blood but by choice, a family that watched movies together, shared recipes, and walked slowly through the park on weekends. Arthur continued to assist Eleanor, organizing a solid will that safeguarded her house and accounts, setting protections so no one could ever again open something in her name without strict verification. One afternoon, a car parked in front of her house and a young woman approached with a small boy holding her hand. Introduced as Naomi, she explained that she was Gregory's new partner and had come on her own, without him, to tell Eleanor that Gregory was in therapy, working 2 jobs, and trying to repair his life. She did not ask for forgiveness. She simply wanted Eleanor to know that effort was being made. The little boy, with wide eyes and an uncertain smile, asked, "Are you my grandma?" The question cracked something soft open in Eleanor's heart. "Yes," she answered gently. "I am." When they left, the house felt oddly full of both old pain and new possibilities. On her 69th birthday, a letter arrived from Gregory, handwritten and long. He didn't beg or justify himself. He described his therapy sessions, his realization of how distorted his sense of entitlement had been, his shame over having treated his mother as a resource instead of a person. He did not ask for immediate reconciliation. He simply said he would keep paying what he owed and that he hoped, someday, they might talk. Eleanor read the pages slowly, then placed the letter in a drawer. She was not ready to answer. Not yet. Forgiveness, she had learned, could not be forced or rushed. It would come or it wouldn't, but in either case, she had the right to choose. Meanwhile, her life was no longer empty. Beverly organized small gatherings at Eleanor's house. The living room, once dominated by Gregory's enormous television and the tension of unspoken resentment, filled with quiet laughter, the clinking of simple cups, the murmur of people who were genuinely happy to be there. Eleanor looked around one evening and realized Michelle's prediction had been wrong. She had not ended up alone. By defending herself, she had made space for new relationships, ones built on respect instead of obligation. One night, after everyone had left and the house was peaceful, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in hand. She thought of Bernard, of the life they had built together, of the promise he had tried to leave her in the form of that little house. She thought of the hospital room, of the shock of the double fridge, of Beverly's knock, of Arthur's calm explanations. She thought of the woman who had believed for so long that love meant enduring everything and giving until there was nothing left. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned to say, enough, even to her own child. She typed a message to Gregory, short and carefully chosen. She told him she had read his letter and appreciated his honesty. She said she wasn't ready to see him yet, but that one day, when both of them were ready to speak as adults without lies or manipulation, she would like to meet his son, her grandson, properly. She pressed send before fear could make her delete it. A few minutes later, his reply arrived. He didn't push, didn't plead. He just wrote that he understood, that he would be waiting whenever she was ready, and that he loved her. She didn't know yet what she felt toward him. The wound was still fresh. But for the first time, the thought of possible future conversations didn't fill her with dread. only with a cautious, fragile curiosity. That night, as she lay in her own bed, in her own room, in the house that was finally truly hers again, she looked at the soft shadows on the ceiling and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A quiet, steady hope. Not the naive hope that everything would magically return to how it once was, but a more mature hope that, even after terrible mistakes and deep betrayals, it was still possible to build a life worth living. She understood now that real family is not defined only by blood, but by how they treat you. True love does not demand your silence in the face of harm. And dignity is not a luxury. It is a right. Eleanor closed her eyes with a small smile. Tomorrow, she would water her new roses, drink coffee with Beverly, and perhaps read a little from the book Arthur had recommended. She would open her old fridge, now comfortably full, and choose what she wanted to eat without shame. She would live at her own pace, in her own space, with her own rules. After a long, painful war, she had finally won the most important battle. The one for herself.